Dear boomers, I read an article in the New York Times today that said or questioned whether obesity is a disease. Is obesity a disease? When Oprah came out and said that it was, it's almost like she proclaimed it to be a disease and everybody believed her. But it's a far more complicated situation than that. Um, you see that she's a famous person, people listen to her, and then when she started to take the medicine called Ozempic, that got everybody's attention, and people in Hollywood are taking it like crazy. And I do believe there's a problem with Ozempic because it causes liver disease, or can, in people who are prone to it or who have side effects with different medicines. And so, what is obesity? Is it a disease, or is it a condition, or is it something else? And it's the debate is actually rooted in science and in public perception. The article I read this morning was written by Julia Belzik, and she is writing a book on the topic. Now, as a nurse, I came to understand that obesity was probably the last bastion of prejudice in our society. People do not treat people who are overweight kindly. People talk about it all the time. If you are with your friends, or you're out for a drink or with dinner, people talk about it. It's a situation where people are not loving their bodies. They're not loving themselves. And that is why this topic is so important. So, yeah, public perception versus science, and maybe the two are not really meeting very well. So the AMA made that 2013 decision to say that they declared obesity a disease, and noting its intent to reduce stigma and improve access to treatment. Unfortunately, it seems like the treatment is still people chasing after weight loss supplements, talking about diet all the time, their workout routines. And there's a huge amount of money to be made in this industry. But there are good intentions, and there are the limitations. There can be misdiagnosis when it comes to this, and misunderstanding. In declaring a disease without nailing down what the disease is, the medical community left obesity open to debate. Now, diagnostically, BMI has been used as a diagnostic tool. And what that is, BMI is a person's weight divided by the square of their height. But it was never meant to be a diagnostic tool. But it has become that. In fact, people, when I was working with one particular nurse practitioner / midwife who would fat shame people who are pregnant and talk about their BMIs as if, and she would shame them. And we'd all roll our eyes. What is this woman doing? Get her out of here. Really, it's just not right. BMI helped create an equivalency between a disease and body size, but that's not how researchers understand obesity today. It's a multifaceted condition. If you are overweight, that doesn't mean that you are unhealthy. And may I add, in other cultures and in other countries, women who are overweight are valued over people who are skinny. Women who are skinny. May I say that? I've seen it. And not personally, but I knew of a friend of mine who was very thin, went to Greece with an overweight friend, and all the men poured themselves into the woman who was overweight, and the poor, thin woman was left in the cold. So there's such a thing as thin fat obesity, where people with normal body size have fat stored in dangerous areas, increasing their health risks. And there's a complexity here. We can see it as a symptom, a risk factor, or a full-blown disease, depending on the context. We have allowed society and insurance companies to decide that obesity is just too much fat, which is an oversimplification, says Dr. Beverly Ching's assertion. There are international approaches. There are different countries, like Denmark. They do not classify obesity as a disease. The Danish government concerns that labeling obesity as a disease would stigmatize those with high BMI unnecessarily. Here's a quote: "Obesity is not classified as a disease in Denmark. The Danish government classifies obesity as a risk factor, not a disease." So we can look at Denmark to show us how the drug Ozempic has impacted healthcare resources. Without a clear definition of clinical obesity, health systems struggle to allocate fair care effectively. Dr. Francesco Rubino's efforts to redefine obesity with a more precise diagnostic framework through his work on the Lancet Commission, he has moved away from this BMI-based diagnostic towards a comprehensive evaluation of a person's symptoms, organ function, and medical history. Quote, "BMI will be relegated to its rightful place as a tool for screening, not diagnosis. There is an importance, though, for accurate diagnosis. Better diagnosing could reduce both overtreatment and undertreatment, and also lowering the stigma associated with obesity, specifically in America. The stigma associated with obesity and self-blame, as we have mentioned earlier, we look towards Hollywood for everything that is desirable in our body and how we should look, and all the facial stuff that people do, and anybody who does lip work looks like a freak. Calling it a disease took some of the onus off to think that it was a lack of willpower. That's good. We can briefly discuss the polarizing views in society, from fat acceptance movements to those blaming obesity on poor lifestyle choices, and how both extremes miss the complexity of the condition. Obesity is not just about size. It's about science, health, and dignity. So I need to encourage you who are looking at this to think critically about how we label health conditions and how these definitions impact access to care, stigma, and health outcomes. This is very important. And people need to, in fact, it's my own personal responsibility to be non-judgmental about disease. And as a nurse, I learned how to do that. I treated everybody with respect, and not every nurse does that. They say terrible things about doctors and nurses and patients when they leave the patients. It's called burnout, let's face it. So, athletes can be classified as obese to underscore the complexity of this issue. So obesity is not just too much fat. BMI is a screening tool, not a diagnosis. This is very important. So when people talk to you, when you go to the doctor's office about BMI, question it. Don't let them make an assumption about what you need to do. And in our own internal guidance system can tell us what we need to do next. We can continue this conversation in an upcoming video, but I think the most important thing is to love yourself and to love every cell in your body, even the fat cells. love it all, because this is why we're here. We're not here to judge other people and their diseases. Um, we're not here to hate ourselves. So we need to have much more tolerance for people of all types of diseases, and realize that there's no reason to uphold health as the only condition that warrants a future for ourselves. But when we get sick, we need to value our illness too. We need to love ourselves even when we're sick and even when we're healthy. There's going to be a video that shows up here. Take a look. And until tomorrow, bye-bye.